flexible, versatile spaces, the overall safety of the park, how we were handling graffiti and potential vandalism. And then we began to consider phasing and the aging of the design. And then back in February, we hosted our third public meeting here at the Northeast Chamber of Commerce. And our big takeaways from that were to add more daily uses for the larger public spaces, handle accessibility issues, provide more infrastructure for additional amenities, and then address security concerns. So I'd like to quickly touch on the different scales that we've been addressing in our research and design decisions. We have three larger scales before we kind of dive down into our master plan scale. This first scale is the regional. That looks at the reservoir and park in context of the interior of the 435 loop. So because we want to reconnect Kessler Park to the larger parks and boulevard system in Kansas City, we use this regional scale to conceptually observe how streets like Prospect Avenue and Paseo provide important connections to the West Bottoms, downtown, 18th and Vine, Midtown, Plaza, and Swope Park. The next scale is smaller, looking at the Reservoir and the Northeast neighborhoods. Here we can see how Kessler Park can more readily serve the adjacent neighborhoods. Streets like St. John and Independence provide important connectivity between local amenities in Kessler Park. With this, we have also observed the current disconnect that prohibits meaningful interaction between amenities along Independence Avenue and Kessler Park. This is caused by a street grid shift that disrupts intersections along Independence Avenue. So the final scale before we enter into the master plan is looking at the reservoir in context to the rest of Kessler Park. Here we begin to see the number of potential collector streets that link Kessler Park's entrances to their most immediate neighborhoods. Additionally, there are numerous trail systems within Kessler Park, with Cliff Drive being as the most recognizable. However, there are a few connections from the south of Kessler via established trails. So looking into like an even smaller scale, we have developed a master plan for the projects, and this master plan acts as a framework for the three design schemes that we're going to talk about later that they kind of have to fit within. And so master plan addresses both parking conditions and entry to the park. After a lengthy study, we determined that Wabash and Prospect are the primary direct entrances to the park from Independence Avenue. With the park, we identified a series of important landmarks that were to be addressed. From these conclusions, we were able to develop the master plan. The master plan is proposing that East Reservoir Drive, which is this dotted line here, proposing that East Reservoir Drive will be closed to vehicular traffic to reclaim pedestrian activity near the reservoir. Because of these changes to road access through Kessler Park, areas adjacent to our reservoir scheme, including disc golf and walking trails, will receive more safety and less interruption from vehicles. So this is the overall master plan, site plan. It addresses three areas of concern: water management, parking, and then how we would enter and proceed up to the park. The first thing that we kind of figured out was the entry approach. And what we did for that is along Independence Avenue here, there's no formal visual cue that says, hey, there's a park up here. So we began to think about how we can try to formalize these intersections and formalize these corridors up to the park. And so through our different studies that we did, we found Wabash and Prospect to be the primary entries up to the park. In order to provide an extra level of safety, we have decided that Prospect Avenue will become pedestrian oriented. So currently it's a two-way street with on-street parking on both sides. We're proposing that it would become a one-way street headed north up to the park. There would still be on-street parking for those residents that live in the neighborhood, but we'd be introducing a planter boulevard to separate the vehicles from the pedestrian zone to add a little bit of safety, and that Planter Boulevard would act as kind of that formal visual cue to the park. And then with some studies into Prospect Avenue is wide enough that we can introduce a Planter Boulevard without having to cut away any kind of on-street parking or room for vehicles. The other thing that we are proposing in the master plan is overflow parking. This is Lexington, this is Wabash here, and this is Prospect. So Prospect being the vehicular oriented street, it would lead up directly to this proposed overflow parking. And along Wabash, we would be introducing extra spots for the daily use of the park. So the last part of the master plan is water management. Watershed has been a large issue for Kessler Park. So with the master plan, we decided to capitalize on some of the natural low points within the park for the use of rain gardens, bioswales, as well as terraced green spaces that allow for this space to be used by the adjacent communities. So in order to provide the surrounding communities with more than just one set in stone solution, our studios decided to pursue 3 schemes, each interpreting the existing reservoir at different scales. These 3 schemes work on a scale from different levels of intervention in terms of how much of the original reservoir has been altered. And so our 3 design schemes are preservation, which has the least amount of intervention, physical intervention, and is more locally focused. And there's intersection, which is pretty moderate about all the intervention. They're thinking about things local and regional, and then integration would be the most amount of physical intervention and has the regional focus. So we're now going to jump into the 3 design schemes. First scheme being preservation. As mentioned, is the least invasive scheme and focuses on adding elements to the preserved structure of the reservoir in order to allow users to view and celebrate the existing conditions. We began thinking with some conceptual, how we were going to handle the site and that type of stuff. The primary site concern of the scheme was to preserve the reservoir and its head, while redeveloping the rest of the park context was not seen as crucial to our concept, as we focused mostly on the interior. In preserving the conditions of the reservoir, we also wanted to preserve the existing paths and circulation through the park. And then by creating 2 entrances / exits to the reservoir here and there, we were able to preserve the reservoir edge and structure while connecting back to the original, the existing paths without much physical intervention. So inside the reservoir, we looked to preserve 2 main elements, the foliage and the graffiti. We didn't see graffiti as vandalism because most of the community kind of actually wanted to really celebrate it and saw it as a form of art. The graffiti itself is left intact while the foliage was controlled and maintained. By removing all the invasive species within the reservoir and reorganizing the foliage to match the density of the existing conditions, the scheme allows for the use of foliage as a primary backdrop to the spaces within. So we're looking at our entry points into our reservoir. We focused on low intervention with the existing streetscapes, with minor and major changes to traffic flow and parking available. Water management was also a primary concern. So the newest addition to the bioretention ponds west of the reservoir was something we sought to relate to. The east entrance shown here includes an overlook that highlights the main entrance while also allowing ample views to the Casey Museum, which is located kind of in this area in the master plan. So the North Basin has been reworked to allow for new experiences through the existing footage by way of an urban hike, as well as allocating spaces for water management through rain gardens. These rain gardens are what connects both basins through this green strip here. And harken back to the original use of the reservoir as a whole, which was to be filled with water. The South Basin has public spaces that address larger scale events that may benefit from performance spaces as well as smaller, more flexible spaces, which support the overlook at the center here. So throughout the semester, like I said, we've been cataloging feedback. Overall, we've received that the preservation concept is strong and successful as an urban hike. Through the exploration of water, it's seen as an opportunity to become a regional destination. However, the scheme does need to be simplified, and some reorganization needs to occur. We are currently looking at more accessibility options and minimizing the constraints on Reservoir's program. So I'm going to kind of break up the rest of this between the North Basin and the South Basin. This is an kind of an overlook looking down into the North Basin, which we're thinking about as this urban hike. So within the ramp that kind of descends down to the Reservoir 4, there are 3 public spaces that offer users the option to stop and interact with the reservoir in special ways. First public space is an intimate seating moment where lectures or outdoor classes or speeches or performance or anything else can happen. This space offers a unique connection to nature and is ideal for activities that require a more quiet personal experience. The second public space we're referring to as public expression. This second public space is more flexible in use and allows for larger activities to happen. The space allows for seating, slides, performances, eating, and a general flex use space. This space is centralized in the North Basin and acts as kind of a focal point for the urban hike. The third public space we're referring to as a learning hub. This final public space along the ramp takes users closer to our rain garden and provides them with 3 opportunities to stop and learn about how the rain gardens work. Each rain garden is broken up the rain garden is broken up into 3 different sections, each with a separate purpose. One section kind of looking at hummingbirds, one section looking at native species, and the last one kind of focusing on different butterflies. And so now in the South Basin, this is kind of a more open space and less controlled. So moving to the South Basin, so moving to the South Basin, our scheme introduces an overlook tower that functions as a focal element that all the spaces in the South Basin connect to. The ramp in the North Basin continues through the South Basin, winding by the tower and across to the exterior of the reservoir. Within the tower, there are restrooms, a large water tank that supports the water management, and rain gardens within the reservoir. And then at the top of the tower is an overlook point where 360-degree views of the city are created. So each facade of this tower serves a different function to the adjacent spaces, while making connections to the reservoir's previous function by incorporating rain gardens that collect water, which is recycled to upkeep foliage within the reservoir. In this back facade, there's a sliding LCD screen that can be used as a backdrop for community events, plays, or concerts. In front of it, there's a stage that can be used for flexible community events while allowing for ample open space for picnics, roaming, or conversation. This render shows where the back facade houses the LCD screen that can be used for movie nights or as a backdrop for community events. For night events or daytime events, the south basin of the reservoir allows for multiple community events, while the north basin allows for local exploration.
Yeah, it's tough out.
Is it run out of that? Okay. This is the preservation scheme. Up next is the intersection scheme.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. My name's Brandon Voorhees, and I'll be going over the intersection scheme. The intersection scheme aims to reconnect the reservoir to the surrounding site of Kessler Park and to provide unique programmatic opportunities, and while providing a balance between the other two schemes. Here's our first design move, which are subtractive cuts that intersect through the reservoir to create spatial division. By creating these cuts to the reservoir, a variety of paths are established for a unique user experience throughout the surrounding park. In this master plan, we are proposing to reorder the park through the cuts we have previously established. These paths intersect through the reservoir, reaching out into the park and to establish an interconnected relationship between the two. By implementing these cuts, we have created a variety of spatial experiences based on their unique spatial qualities. These are then used for our programmatic needs that best suit the new condition of these spaces. The second major design move for the reservoir are the additive tectonic elements. The first additive element that we'll be looking at is the manipulation of the ground plane in the southern basin, highlighted here in blue. This element is designed as a wooden deck that the Callaway defines program and creates an interactive environment for occupants. The second additive elements are seating elements that are implemented in the southern and northern basin. Looking closer, these seating elements are designed to provide multiple functions as well, in addition to speak the same language as the additive ground plane. The third additive element are the pods, highlighted here in blue. These pods hold necessary programs such as concessions, storage, and restrooms, providing functionality and amenities proposed in the reservoir. And here are some plans of the concession, storage, and restrooms. Okay, and then the fourth additive elements are the overhead shading structures. These images here are highlighting this. So sorry. Okay. These two structures are located in the southern and northern basins and are designed to suit program and are responsive to the initial cuts through the reservoir. The additive and subtractive design moves we have established provide specific space for these programs. The northern basin and southern basins are unique to their own programs and focus on a variety of community engagement functions. And then southern basin, with the present images on the left, the program focuses on recreational activities more for the larger Kansas City community area versus the northern basin, where the program is focused on neighborhood communal events. And here in this plan, we're highlighting those specific programs in the northern and southern basin. And then these are highlighting program images in the southern basin that is more for recreational activities and space for children to play. And then this is in the northern, where we would have more larger events and room for markets as well. This is in the north basin, looking at the event space with an auditorium to the right and space underneath the canopy to the left for markets and other events as well with pods. And then this is an image in the southern basin showcasing the green space that would help hold sports events and area underneath the defined space by the overhead plane and pods as well. And then now we'll be going into the integration scheme.
Good evening, my name is Donovan Douglas, and I will be introducing the integration scheme. Our scheme is the most intervention in the reservoir, and we are actually proposing to remove the southern wall of the reservoir and integrate the reservoir into the rest of Kessler Park. To do this, we are understanding that while we are intervening the most, we still want to be conscious about how much we're interfering with the rest of the park. Over on the left, you can see that we're trying to restrain ourselves to a certain measure within the rest of the park, and then allow the already fantastic qualities of Kessler Park to remain and shine through. Over on the right, you can see the beginnings of how we're imagining the creation of this scheme, starting with the entry plaza that would stop and turn people from Wabash and Lexington up our formal axis into the reservoir itself, up into the front lawn, which would provide that access from the entry plaza into the main part of the reservoir, as well as daily activities, rest of the neighborhood. The south basin, which would provide a flexible space with some movable canopies that would actually facilitate things like artist block or farmers markets and things like that. The north amphitheater. Oh, there it is. The north amphitheater and the north pavilion would help to provide the ultimate magnum opus of this scheme, where we're providing a regional draw for the reservoir and the rest of the neighborhood. To understand this regional draw, we also wanted to understand the regional events in Kansas City themselves. Over on the left, we looked at various different activities within Kansas City and started to categorize them into different things or different categories that we can understand could happen in the right side, which is actually the performance space and north amphitheater that I mentioned earlier. That would provide about 4,000 seats, in addition to a smaller amphitheater on the south side for smaller activities such as community dance recitals, perhaps. This again is going over the rest of our scheme. So I mentioned the plaza, the front lawn, the flexible space, and the overlook. The overlook is what we also like to call the north pavilion, and that's providing some welcome facilities in the park, things like bathrooms, community meeting space, and also rooms that help to facilitate those larger regional activities that can happen in that north amphitheater. As well, on the middle wall, which is currently existing, as my classmate mentioned earlier, across the two basins of the reservoir, that helps to provide some further activities or further facilities, I should say, to that north amphitheater. So far this semester and our previous time we were here, we got feedback that was describing how the north amphitheater was too large. And so we wanted to provide some space for those smaller activities. In the South Plaza, those canopies I mentioned, they wanted some more development into how exactly those would work. Currently, we're imagining them being on tracks, similar to the streetcar. And then the front lawn was also brought up in terms of providing more daily uses. Those changes and those feedbacks were incorporated into what we're showing you today. So in terms of the integration site plan, we start at that entry plaza at the intersection of Wabash and Lexington. That stops and then turns you onto a formal axis. That's that bottom rendering you can see over on the bottom right. The top rendering is actually within our front lawn, and we're imagining that this could allow for those daily activities for the neighborhood, things like splash pad, trampolines, possibly other playground equipment that provide that space for those kids to really start to imagine this space as part of their neighborhood. And of course, the adults that want to go jumping in the park, because who wouldn't want to go jumping in this amazing park? This is a more zoomed in axon looking at our reservoir in particular. Each number is actually corresponding to a rendering that I'm going to show you here in a moment. So the south basin you can see are those movable canopies, as well as some playground space. We are also retaining that graffiti space on the middle wall and as well along that angled part. We felt that was a welcome community campus for this area. You can also see that middle wall and the north amphitheater in addition to the north pavilion. So the first view is taken along our formal axis, looking at the middle wall, the south basin, and the playgrounds along the middle wall. And here we wanted to just highlight that we're trying to create a space that is three-dimensional in experience. One can walk across the middle wall, one can be inside the reservoir, they can be along the angled part, the angled walls of the reservoir. The whole space, the whole reservoir is being used and integrated into the rest of Kessler Park. And over on the right, you can see those canopies. These are those canopies configured in something such as the Art Garden KC, which is an activity that already occurs in Pendleton Heights. And we're proposing that these canopies could provide a welcome facility for those activities to happen within a park. And so roads and streets may not have to be closed, and instead that could happen in a separate location. This is looking at the edge of the reservoir, again at that south basin. In the foreground of the picture, you can also see what we're proposing is the microclimate area. While the reservoir itself cannot hold water anymore, it does still produce water. So we are trying to bring that water over into the side of the reservoir, the western side, and help to create a garden space that could start to bring in pollinators and provide habitats for things like monarch butterflies and various other things within this region. It could start to be a fantastic wildlife area that isn't necessarily seen in the Kessler Park as it is today. This is that north basin. This is a smaller amphitheater in addition to our much larger north amphitheater. So this could facilitate up to about 307 people. I say about, and then give you a specific number in case you weren't sure. And this is actually a rendering of something like a community dance recital or dance practice or something like that. But it's something for the North Basin to do outside of those really large events, like this one. This is a really large event where you can start to see a sporting event viewing. Opening day, the Royals playing, can happen here. You can see the entire vista of Kansas City downtown from the top of our North Pavilion, and everyone can sit along what we call the Strand. That amphitheater provides welcome ADA access in addition to an amphitheater seating and things like that. This is inside the North Pavilion. So this North Pavilion interior space could be used as spaces for the community to house locker rooms for disc golf tournaments, perhaps, or even just general community events like what we're having right now. You could have something, you could imagine this space could be housed within Kessler Park itself. That yellow box you see over there is storage and a kitchenette that can help facilitate some further things that could happen in that space. To get up this North Pavilion, we are proposing a long ramp along the back side, the north side. Over on the right, you can see some sandblasted glass that is actually there to help compose the southern facade of this building. You can see over in some renderings over with our group. And you can actually imagine that could also light up at night, become this beacon that all of Kessler Park could really become this regional draw. On the left, you can see some louvers. These louvers we're proposing could help to frame different views. From this location in Kessler Park, you can see Kansas City, Kansas, the East Bottoms, and Kansas City Museum. Each of these could actually be articulated to aim your views in those directions. This is that screen from the outside. And that is actually the final slide for the integration scheme. So that's the introduction for each of the three schemes: the preservation, intersection, and integration. If you have any questions, please email the address you see before you. And if you're online or in person, you can actually use this QR code to access a survey that we provided for today to provide some more feedback, which if you would like to provide some more specific feedback or some feedback that maybe you don't want everyone to hear. And that we can then get my.
That's me again. Thank you all for the presentation. I just want to open it up. If there are any general questions, we can answer them, or we're going to ask you now to go, those of you who are present here, to go to individual groups and provide feedback and input and hands-on discussion about the project and the perspectives for the project. One other thing I would like to clarify is Christina presented what her group is doing. KCDC is specifically working on the reservoir redevelopment. Christina is working on master plan for Kessler Park. And so these are two complementary studies that are happening simultaneously, so that there's not any confusion. Sometimes in our presentation, we refer to Kessler Park rather than Kessler Reservoir. I just want to make sure that it's a clear understanding that we have a specific look on Kessler Reservoir. We did look at some larger kind of context to be able to set up a perspective for development of the reservoir, but we are not working on a master plan. That's what Christina is doing, and that's why we're working with Christina and Hoxie Collective to kind of create a comprehensive picture that allow us to make our two studies complementary one to another and serve as community. Yes,
Having made that clarification, and thank you, will this be shared though with the park board or the staff there or?
yes.
So usually every year we try to share the presentations with the Board of Commissioners.
Okay.
So we'll do the same at the end of the project this year.
So with that, yes.
What is the overall size of the reservoir? Like if you had to give is it the size of Arrowhead or like you could put it in a general term?
A football field, an average size football field fits inside of it. I believe it's the Space Needle in Seattle. If you rotate it on its side, the reservoir is 1 foot shorter.
Thank you.
So.
Large.
So, and go visit. So with that, we can stop here and really, if we would have more time to indulge us, students would greatly benefit from your feedback and input. And that's really the whole purpose of us being here together. So thank you again for being here. And thank you, Bobby, for allowing us to use the space again.
Thank you guys very much. This is great. This is great.
Thanks. So with that, and there's some refreshments and some snickies, so you can have energy to provide the feedback and input.
Those of us who are really meeting this, I think that's
Can I? I thought this was.